Every day, we see the darker side of the world around us. We witness how people can hurt others in ways that are hard to understand. It's a sad part of life, but it's something we can't ignore. As someone who dives into the world of crime, I'm here to share the most shocking stories and try to understand what drives people to do such things. I'm Michael, and today, I've got another unreal true crime story for you. It was a warm evening in July 2005 when Carol and Reggie Sumner were getting ready for dinner in their Jacksonville home. They were enjoying a peaceful life together, looking forward to their future. But their quiet night took a terrifying turn when someone knocked on the door. Carol, always kind and welcoming, answered without a second thought. What happened next was unimaginable. The couple suddenly found themselves in a nightmare, their home no longer a safe haven. Hours later, they were gone, leaving behind a trail of strange clues, a ripped-out phone cord, a missing car, and untouched medications. As their family searched for answers, one question hung in the air. Where were Carol and Reggie Sumner? Carol Margaret Alford, born on February 16, 1944, grew up in North Charleston, South Carolina. As a teenager, she experienced her first love with James Reginald Sumner, better known as Reggie, who was born on September 18, 1943, in the same town. Their youthful romance ended after a few months, setting the stage for their separate, often turbulent adult lives. Carol faced challenges in her relationships. She married twice. Her first marriage ended in divorce, and her second was marred by domestic violence. In February 1987, her second husband, defying a restraining order, showed up at her home and shot her 7 times. Despite her severe injuries, Carol survived, but her attacker took his own life when confronted by the police. Carol's 2 children, Rhonda and Frederick, were from her 2 marriages. At just 10 years old, Rhonda cared for her mother during her recovery, showcasing the deep bond they shared. Determined to rebuild her life, Carol dedicated herself to her family and career. She worked for over 25 years in various roles, including at the Charleston Air Force Base and a local university. She also took on night shifts at Belk and a cable company to support her family. In the year 2000, a seemingly ordinary phone call to the cable company reconnected Carol with Reggie, her high school sweetheart. Reggie had served in the Navy and worked for the CSX Railroad after they lost touch. That call sparked a reunion, reigniting their long-lost feelings. By 2001, the couple, now in their late 50s, married in an intimate ceremony at Carol's home. Their children rejoiced, seeing Carol find happiness after years of hardship. The couple settled into a loving life together, becoming cherished members of their community in South Carolina. Among their neighbors was Tiffany Cole, a young woman born on December 3, 1981, in Florida. Raised in a large family, Tiffany moved to South Carolina during her childhood. Though her life was marked by hardships, including the loss of her father, Carol and Reggie stepped in to support her, treating her like one of their own. In 2005, due to health concerns and the need for a warmer climate, Carol and Reggie decided to move to Jacksonville, Florida. Carol had contracted hepatitis C during a blood transfusion after her shooting, which later led to liver cancer. Both she and Reggie also battled diabetes and osteoporosis. During their preparations, they sold their Chevrolet Lumina to Tiffany on a flexible payment plan, demonstrating their generosity. Moving to Florida was particularly hard for Rhonda, who remained in North Charleston. Despite the distance, she maintained daily contact with her mother. On July 10, 2005, Rhonda became alarmed when she couldn't reach her mother or Reggie for 2 days. Overwhelmed with worry, she traveled to their Florida home, where her fears intensified. Upon arrival, Rhonda found the house eerily quiet. The couple's medications, meals, and even their wheelchair and walking aids were left behind. Their beloved dog, Mickey, had been left unattended. Knowing they couldn't have left under such circumstances, Rhonda reported their disappearance to the authorities. The police quickly launched an investigation, noting missing items and the absence of the couple's car. 2 days after the initial investigation began, authorities located the Sumner's car nearly 50 miles from Jacksonville. The vehicle was unlocked, and the keys were missing. While examining the couple's home, investigators uncovered a bank statement showing a substantial account balance. This prompted a review of recent transactions, revealing multiple suspicious withdrawals. Acting swiftly, the police contacted the bank and froze the accounts to prevent further access. Later, the police received a puzzling call. The caller, claiming to be Reggie Sumner, explained that he was out of town attending his sister-in-law's funeral and had been alerted by a neighbor about his garage being open. He also mentioned losing access to his bank accounts and credit cards. However, the officer who took the call immediately sensed something was off. The voice sounded far too young to belong to a man in his 60s. When asked to speak with Carol, a young female voice responded. Suspicious, the officer inquired about contacting family members to confirm their story, but the caller claimed their relatives lived in another state. Using the phone number from the call, investigators traced it to a young man named Michael James Jackson, 23 years old. Records showed his phone had been active near the Sumner's residence on the day they disappeared. Further investigation revealed numerous calls to a car rental agency where Tiffany Cole, a neighbor of the Sumners, had rented a Mazda. The car had not been returned but was equipped with a GPS tracker. Authorities reached out to Tiffany's family, and her brother provided her address. Meanwhile, the GPS data showed the rented Mazda had been near the Sumners' home on the night they vanished. Surveillance footage corroborated this, capturing Michael withdrawing cash from ATMs with the Mazda in the background. The trail led investigators to a Best Western hotel in Charleston, where Tiffany had rented 2 rooms. On July 14th, police detained Tiffany, Michael, and 2 other individuals, Bruce Nixon and Alan Wade, both 18 years old. A search of the hotel rooms uncovered incriminating evidence, including the Sumners' belongings. Reggie's bank card was found in Michael's pocket, and the Mazda's trunk contained Reggie's coin collection, personal documents, and a checkbook. Newly purchased items and a laptop were also discovered. Tiffany was arrested shortly afterward near her home. She still had possession of the Chevrolet Lumina the Sumners had sold her. The family of Carol and Reggie was devastated to learn that Tiffany, someone they had treated like a daughter, could betray them so horrifically. Alongside Tiffany and Michael, Bruce and Alan were also taken into custody. The first to break under questioning was Bruce Nixon. He detailed the plan and revealed what had happened to Carol and Reggie. The plot began in June 2005 when Tiffany and Michael visited Alan in Jacksonville. During their stay, Tiffany contacted the Sumners to ask if they could stay the night, to which the couple gladly agreed. During the visit, Carol and Reggie mentioned the $99,000 they had earned from selling their South Carolina home, a fact that sparked a sinister scheme. Tiffany and Michael recruited Bruce and Alan to help execute their plan. They believed the Sumners, with their health issues and predictable routines, would be easy targets. On the night of July 8, 2005, Armed with duct tape and plastic bags, they arrived at the Sumners' home in the rented Mazda, intentionally avoiding the Lumina to reduce suspicion. As they approached the Sumners' home, Tiffany and her boyfriend Michael stayed in their car, parked discreetly down the street. Alan and Bruce, the other accomplices, walked to the front door and knocked. Inside, Reggie and Carol were preparing fried chicken when they heard the sound. Carol answered, greeted by the two young men who politely asked to borrow the phone. Trusting and kind, she allowed them inside. Once inside, the situation quickly turned sinister. Alan ripped the phone cord from the wall, and Bruce brandished a toy gun, threatening the couple. They forced Carol and Reggie into the bedroom, where they bound and gagged them with duct tape. Using portable radios, Alan and Bruce contacted Michael, who entered the house to search for bank information and valuables. Meanwhile, Tiffany remained in the car, waiting at the end of the street. After collecting the couple's belongings, including jewelry, a safe, and Reggie's Federal Trust Credit Union bank card, the attackers forced Carol and Reggie into the trunk of their Lincoln Town car. Reggie was dressed in pajamas with an ankle brace, and Carol, frail from her liver cancer treatments, was visibly weak. The perpetrators then loaded additional stolen items into the rented Mazda Tiffany was driving. The two vehicles departed, with Alan and Bruce driving the Lincoln, the Sumners trapped in the trunk, and Tiffany and Michael following in the Mazda. Their destination was a remote wooded area in southern Georgia, chosen days earlier for its isolation. The group had agreed that if a police officer stopped them, the Mazda would accelerate away to create a diversion, but no such encounter occurred. Upon arriving at the secluded site, the vehicles separated. 2 days prior, armed with stolen shovels and flashlights provided by Tiffany, the group had dug a large, shallow grave, about 5 feet deep and covering roughly 2 square meters. The Lincoln pulled up near the hole, and the attackers opened the trunk, dragging the terrified couple out. Reggie was strangled and coerced into revealing his bank account PIN. Then, bound and helpless, Reggie and Carol were thrown alive into the grave. As dirt was shoveled over them, they struggled in vain to free themselves, their muffled cries silenced by the suffocating weight of soil. Clinging to one another in their final moments, Carol and Reggie, who had hoped to live out their rekindled love, faced a horrifying end. Satisfied, Michael returned to the car, elated at having obtained the PIN. The group drove off, abandoning the Lincoln in Sanderson, Florida, before continuing their journey in the rented Mazda. They made a stop at an ATM to withdraw money using Reggie's account, then headed to a hotel to celebrate. Over the following days, they pawned Carol's jewelry, used her bank account, and spent thousands of dollars. They even rented a limousine and posed for photos, flaunting wads of cash and sipping champagne in a grotesque display of triumph. Meanwhile, Tiffany and Alan returned to the Sumners' home with bleach and rubber gloves to clean the scene and steal additional items, including a computer. By July 16th, investigators, armed with confessions from the detained suspects, located the burial site and recovered the victims' bodies. The 4 were charged with first-degree murder, armed robbery, and kidnapping. The trial began in October 2007. The prosecution presented damning evidence, including the testimony of Dr. Anthony Clark, a forensic pathologist, who confirmed that Carol and Reggie had been buried alive. The details horrified the courtroom, underscoring the cruelty of the crime. From the stand, Bruce tearfully apologized to the victims' families, expressing deep regret. Having pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, he claimed his youth and fear influenced his actions. His family also pleaded for leniency, with his mother and sister testifying that he was a good person who made a terrible mistake. In a powerful moment, Carol's daughter addressed the court. Speaking on behalf of her family, she stated that they had forgiven Bruce, believing her mother and Reggie would not have wanted him to spend his life in prison. She asked the judge for mercy, demonstrating extraordinary compassion in the face of unimaginable loss. Bruce Nixon's confession and subsequent testimony against his accomplices ultimately sealed the fate of the other defendants, offering some measure of relief to the grieving Sumner family. The prosecution built a damning case against Michael, highlighting his active role in both planning and executing the crime. Surveillance footage captured him purchasing rubber gloves with his co-conspirators, and his initial police interrogation revealed chilling details. Michael admitted knowing about the pre-dug grave before the robbery and described standing by with a flashlight as Bruce and Alan buried the Sumners alive. Despite his attempts to downplay his role, the prosecution argued that his presence and actions demonstrated a complete disregard for human life. Cell phone records placed Michael near the burial site at the time of the murders, and evidence showed he called the Sumners' bank from the scene. He was also caught on camera using Reggie's ATM card shortly after the crime. The jury saw this as clear evidence of his culpability. Tiffany Cole's defense focused on portraying her as an impressionable young woman led astray by Michael's influence. Her lawyers argued that she was unaware the grave would be used to kill the Sumners, believing it was meant to hide stolen property. They presented testimony from a psychiatrist who claimed Tiffany suffered from mental health issues and had a history of substance abuse. However, the prosecution painted a different picture, emphasizing her critical role in the crime. Tiffany had driven the group to the Sumners' home, purchased duct tape and gloves used during the attack, and pawned stolen jewelry. Most damning of all, she had impersonated Carol in a phone call to police, attempting to convince authorities that the Sumners were still alive. Her participation in celebrating the crime, documented in photographs of the group posing with wads of cash and champagne, shocked the court. The judge emphasized Tiffany's deep involvement, noting she held the flashlight during the grave's excavation, escorted the killers to the Sumners' home, and actively facilitated the robbery and murders. Her actions, he said, were deliberate and calculated. On October 19, 2007, after less than 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Tiffany guilty of first-degree murder. 9 of the 12 jurors voted for the death penalty. In March 2008, Tiffany Cole, then 25, was sentenced to death by lethal injection, along with life imprisonment for the kidnappings and 15 years for each count of robbery. Michael, also 25, and Alan Wade, 20, received death sentences. Bruce Nixon, who had cooperated with investigators and testified against the others, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Initially facing a life sentence, Bruce's cooperation and expressions of remorse led the judge to reduce his sentence to 45 years. The convictions were followed by a series of appeals. Tiffany's first appeal in 2010 was denied. In 2015, during another appeal, she gave an interview to journalist Diane Sawyer, claiming she had found peace and become a changed person. However, the prosecutor remained unmoved, stating that in over 20 years of his career, he had never encountered a crime as heinous as the torture and murder of the Sumners. Tiffany's defense in the appeal argued ineffective legal representation during her trial. Her lawyer criticized her original defense team, claiming they were unprepared. One of her attorneys allegedly sought a plea deal and lacked readiness for trial when Tiffany rejected the state's offer. The other attorney joined the case just a month before trial and had only recently become certified to handle death penalty cases. Despite these arguments, Florida law holds all participants in a crime equally culpable if their actions contribute to the outcome, even if they did not directly cause a victim's death. As such, Tiffany remained on death row, her involvement and the overwhelming evidence cementing her guilt in the eyes of the law. Bruce Nixon's detailed confession and his cooperation with authorities were pivotal in convicting his co-defendants. For the Sumner family, his actions provided some closure amidst their immense loss. However, the legal proceedings for Tiffany Cole, Michael, and Alan Wade painted a complex picture of justice, mitigation, and lingering questions about their culpability. During Tiffany's appeal, her defense argued that her trial attorney failed to sufficiently investigate her mental health, dysfunctional family background, and psychological vulnerabilities. According to the appeal, Tiffany's low intelligence and history of trauma were not presented to the jury, leaving out critical context about her tendency to be easily intimidated and overly compliant, especially with men. Her lawyer during the trial chose not to suppress her post-arrest statements but instead used them to argue she was a minor participant, portraying her as a good person who fell under the influence of bad men. The prosecution dismissed these claims, stating that Tiffany's original defense team had been solid. The prosecutor deliberately avoided mentioning Tiffany's past involvement in prostitution and drug dealing, believing it could harm her case more than help it. Ultimately, the Florida Supreme Court upheld Tiffany's death sentence, finding no grounds to overturn her conviction. In 2017, a ruling by the Florida Supreme Court required unanimous jury recommendations for death sentences, retroactive to 2002. This opened the door for resentencing appeals for Tiffany, Michael, and Alan. However, a subsequent law reversed this requirement, adding uncertainty to their cases. Alan Wade's defense emphasized his youth. He had turned 18 just 47 days before the crime, and argued that adolescent brain development differs significantly from that of adults. His lawyer pointed out that had Alan been slightly younger, he would not have been eligible for the death penalty. The court ultimately commuted Alan's sentence to life imprisonment without parole. Reports later revealed that while on death row, Alan had married a Frenchwoman named Sigrid, with whom he had a child. The circumstances of the child's conception remained a mystery, as conjugal visits are not permitted in death row facilities. Sigrid stated she would only share the truth with her son when he was older. Tiffany remains incarcerated at the Lowell Correctional Institution, now in her early 40s. Though she was sentenced to death in 2008, she has continued to seek resentencing. Michael's original jury had recommended the death penalty with an 8-4 vote, which no longer met the new standard for unanimity. However, under Florida's updated law, unanimous jury decisions are no longer required for capital punishment, complicating his prospects. For Carol and Reggie's family, the legal outcomes brought mixed emotions. While the sentences offered a sense of justice, they could not erase the pain of their loss. Carol's children, Rhonda and Frederick, shared how they sometimes imagined their mother on the other end of a phone call, only to be struck again by the reality of her absence. Rhonda spoke publicly about her family's decision to forgive the perpetrators, stating that she believed her mother and Reggie would have shown compassion as well. She even formed friendships with the families of Tiffany, Alan, and Bruce, finding healing in forgiveness. For Rhonda, focusing on how her loved ones lived rather than how they died brought her peace. Carol and Reggie's ashes remained together in an urn at Rhonda's home. A headstone in a nearby cemetery honors their memory with the inscription, "Together, Forever." Their murder shocked all who knew them, leaving an indelible mark on the community. The crime gained national attention, covered extensively by the media, and featured in a 2011 episode of Deadly Women on Discovery Channel. Despite the tragedy, Carol and Reggie's enduring love serves as a poignant reminder of their strength and the bonds they cherished until their final moments. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.